In this video, we are talking about every single wide receiver that you need to either start or sit in week 8 of fantasy football, going through every single matchup. There's no teams on bye, so buckle up. Starting with the Thursday night game, Minnesota at the Rams. It's going to be a good game, a lot of points scored, two really good offenses now that Cooper Kupp is going to be back, potentially Puka Nacua. I bet he sits another week, but if he's back, this offense will be rolling on all cylinders. Obviously, you're starting Justin Jefferson, you're starting Cooper Kupp. I would even start Puka if he is active. He might be limited. He might not have a full-time role, but if Puka's out there, he should be in your lineup. I would sit Tutu Atwell with Kupp returning. We know Stafford is just going to target Kupp at a very high rate. Kupp is finally back after missing the last 4 games with an ankle injury. The trade rumors are swirling that he's going to go to every single team. It feels like, I bet he doesn't get traded at all, but we shall see. And it's an amazing matchup for Kupp. It's a good game to return, as Minnesota is allowing 260 passing yards per game, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. So Kupp should absolutely go off on Thursday Night Football. And I would have Addison in your flex spot. He didn't go off last week like we thought he would in a really good matchup against Detroit, but he has another favorable matchup against the Rams secondary. It's going to be a high-scoring game with a projected 48.5 point total for this one. So really exciting Thursday night game. Two really good offenses. You want to get as many pieces of each team as possible. On to the next matchup, Baltimore at Cleveland. A nice AFC North division rival clash between two teams that hate each other at this point. It could be a not so fantasy friendly game either, I will caution you. If you have Derrick Henry, you're feeling really good. If you have Derrick Henry at all this year, you're feeling really good. But this feels like another 150 plus yard touchdown, 2-touchdown game for King Henry. Flowers got banged up in week 7. It looked like a bad ankle injury, but he ended up returning. Just monitor the practice reports this week. If he's out there, you have to start him. But looking at how this season has gone, if Baltimore gets up big early and Zay Flowers doesn't get a lot of those receptions early on, then he could be phased out of the game. We've seen that countless times earlier on in the year, and yes, Jameis Winston is starting for the Browns, so that's a good thing. That's better than Deshaun Watson, who's now out for the year. So maybe Cleveland can put up points against Baltimore. They just don't have a lot of guys to throw to. Cedric Tillman should be a start or flex consideration for your team, but Amari Cooper now with the Buffalo Bills, yeah, they have Nick Chubb. It's going to be a huge David Njoku game. So I know we're talking about wide receivers, but if you have Njoku, get him in your tight end 1 spot. He was a must start for us last week. He's going to be the same this week. And Cleveland has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So get Flowers in there if he's active, but just be cautious. Temper expectations a little bit, because it could just be a bunch of running and good defense in this one. I'd be sitting Rashad Bateman and Elijah Moore. You can flex Jerry Jeudy if you want, if you're really desperate. Doesn't get me excited. But with Jameis Winston now under center, we know he likes to just chuck it. So he gives his guys an opportunity, something that Deshaun Watson did not do. Like I said, Cedric Tillman, quality start. We know you can't run against Baltimore, but you can throw, as they are allowing the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. With Winston under center, there's a chance that Tillman has a solid game. So probably going to be a low-scoring affair and a lot of defense if I had to guess, but we shall see. Moving on to Tennessee at Detroit. You're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I would not mind if you don't start anyone else in this game. DeAndre Hopkins now with the Kansas City Chiefs. Tennessee is just a really bad offense. With Mason Rudolph under center, Will Levis, both really bad quarterbacks. And Calvin Ridley has not looked great himself. I know he's not getting many good looks out there, but I would not be excited to start Ridley. You can throw him in your flex if you're desperate. Detroit, not a very good secondary. Tennessee's probably going to be trailing in this one. So it will be a positive game script for Ridley. But other than that, I don't want any piece of this game. We know Jameson Williams. It's kind of weird what's going on with Williams. He was suspended for 2 games, but now he can appeal. But now he's practicing, so monitor that. If Jameson is somehow pushing off this suspension, which I don't see how he would do that, then you're starting Jameson Williams. But I would not expect him to play. So the moral of the story here is you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been really good as of late, and that is about it. On to Arizona at Miami. You're starting Marvin Harrison Jr., even though you probably don't want to right now. He is struggling. Kyler missed him on probably what would have been a 70-yard touchdown last week. And the problem is the coaching staff is not doing Marvin any favors, and neither is Kyler Murray. Murray is looking really bad across the board. So it's hurting Harrison. It's making him look like a bad player. I don't think Marvin Harrison is a bad player. In my last video, I talked about if you can buy low on Harrison now, I would absolutely be doing that. Bet on talent, bet on Kyler and him figuring it out, getting on the same page. But you're starting Marvin Harrison Jr. Unless you somehow have a better option, don't get cute. It's not a great matchup against Jalen Ramsey and company. Miami has allowed the 4th fewest points per game to receivers. So it's not a great matchup. He hasn't been playing well, but this is a guy who can go off for 100 yards plus and 1 to 2 touchdowns. So make sure he's in your lineup, even though you probably don't want him to be. And thank the heavens, because it looks like Tua is going to return this week, which means Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle can confidently be started everywhere. I think they both have really big games. I think Tua just airs it out. I think Miami just crushes Arizona. So, yeah, thank the Lord that Tua is back, because Tyreek Hill and Waddle needed him to return in the worst way. I would sit Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. I don't really want anyone on this offense in the passing game. In terms of wide receivers, obviously James Conner, Trey McBride, you're starting those guys. But Tua's back, and that is really good news for everyone in Miami. And hopefully Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray can get on the same page, even in a pretty tough matchup. All right, on to the next game, New York Jets at the Patriots. You're starting DeVonta Adams. You're starting Garrett Wilson. That should be obvious at this point, even though they both didn't have good games last week. But they both still saw very nice volume. 9 targets apiece. Yes, the Patriots have a really good corner in Christian Gonzalez. That's a little bit of a concern, but we've seen Gonzalez get burned by Stephon Diggs. I think DeVonta and Garrett Wilson are going to both probably go off in this one, with the Jets 2-5. They need a win in the worst way. They seem like they're a team that's just ready to explode. They have all the pieces, all the talent, and solid play calling with new offensive coordinator taking over, Todd Downing. So I think the Jets just put up like 35 points on offense in this one. It's an absolute blowout. For your flex, you can throw in Demario Douglas. That is about it. I don't want anything to do with Jalen Polk or Kayshon Boutte. I would be stashing Javon Baker on your bench right now in case he has a blow-up game with Drake May. But outside of that, you're not starting any Patriots wide receiver except Demario Douglas in your flex if you are desperate. I'm just predicting it to be a very big game for the Jets on offense and not much else. Moving on to Atlanta at Tampa Bay. It is Drake London season. It is very nice to see London finally going off. We know the talent that he's had over the last couple of years, and he's been held back by Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder and every bad quarterback that they've had. Finally, a capable quarterback in Kirk Cousins, and London is going off. He's the wide receiver 9 right now in fantasy points per game. A touchdown in 3 straight games, along with averaging 23.7 fantasy points per game over that stretch. 5 touchdowns on the year. Something London has not been able to do early on in his career, was score touchdowns because of the quarterback play, because of the play calling, but that is no longer a thing. He is cooking with Kirk Cousins, and it's really nice to see. Drake is locked and loaded in your starting lineup, in your wide receiver 1 spot every single week. I don't think the Falcons are going to have to do much in this one to win this game, with Mike Evans out for 3 to 4 weeks. Chris Godwin, unfortunately, out for the year. This Bucs offense could struggle. Yeah, they have a running game, but that could be about it. So not super appealing outside of London for Atlanta. For the Bucs, I like Jalen McMillan. I mean, Baker's going to have to throw the football to someone. I think he's going to throw a lot to Cade Otton, the tight end, and Rachaad White. But McMillan at wide receiver will probably be the main beneficiary. One more note on Drake London. Tampa Bay has given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So London is going to continue on his heater that he's on right now. And like I said, McMillan is worth a flex consideration with Godwin and Evans out. Atlanta has allowed the 12th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. The Bucs likely have to score a good amount of points to keep up with the Falcons. So McMillan, nice flex option if you are desperate. On to Green Bay at Jacksonville. This Packers offense is just really good. It's one of the best units in football. You're starting Jaden Reed for the Packers, even though he's kind of coming off a poor game, had a couple bad drops, that 50-yard pass right before halftime. He had it and then couldn't complete the process, but he's been really good outside of that. He has a safe floor, really high ceiling. Don't steer away from Reed after one bad game. He's locked and loaded in your lineup. And Jacksonville has allowed the 6th most points per game to wide receivers. This Jacksonville defense has been horrible across the board. I don't mind starting Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. Romeo Doubs has to be in your lineup as well because this Jacksonville team is so bad. This defense is so bad that I think a lot of these wide receivers are going to have big days. It's always kind of hard to predict which one it's going to be. I think Jaden Reed is just the safest out of all of them. But if you have any one of them, I don't mind starting any of them because this Packers offense is just going to steamroll this defense for Jacksonville. You're starting Brian Thomas Jr., even in a tough matchup against Jair Alexander. But we saw Thomas succeed last week against Christian Gonzalez, against the Patriots. He went 5 catches, 89 yards, and a touchdown. So we know Brian can beat good corners, and now he's going to face another one in Jair. It should be interesting, but you're not benching BTJ at this point. You can't. He's playing really well. He's one of the best rookie receivers in the game right now. He needs to be in your starting lineup. I think this quietly could be a big Christian Kirk game. So if you are in need of a flex play, I kind of like his upside. I think he plays very well out of the slot. I think Lawrence looks for him often. I think Jacksonville is going to be trailing in this one, so they're going to be throwing a lot. Kirk has kind of cooled off himself, but I think he has one of those 5 for 85 yards and a touchdown type of game. So start him if you are in need of a wide receiver. Moving on to the Colts at the Texans. You're starting Stephon Diggs. You're starting Tank Dell. I have him as a flex option, but I think Tank Dell is a must start. He's coming off a rough game against Green Bay, but so is Diggs. Like, CJ Stroud had no time to throw the ball in that game, which is part of the reason why both of these guys put up pretty bad performances. Yes, Tank Dell laid a goose egg. He should have had a touchdown in the first quarter that he dropped. He has to catch that, but he didn't. It just feels like one of those games after a really bad loss. Like when a really good team has a bad loss the next week, I just think the Texans are going to come out on fire. They're going to put up 30 plus points against this questionable Colts defense. I feel like the Texans have shredded the Colts in the past as well. They don't have a defense like the Packers do. So start all your Texans players. On the Colts side, it's really hard to trust Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs just because of Anthony Richardson. Like if Joe Flacco was starting, they would both be must starts for me, even in a tough matchup against the stingy Texans secondary. But with Anthony Richardson, the ceiling, even the floor for MPJ and Josh Downs is not pretty. So if I had to pick, I'd probably start Pittman if I really have to in my flex, but I don't really feel good about it. And that's unfortunate. Maybe Richardson turns it around, but right now he's just looking like a really bad, rusty quarterback. Moving on to the Saints game at the Chargers, you're starting Chris Olave if he's active. I know he's dealing with that concussion right now. He's had 3 concussions over the last 3 years, so he might miss this one. It would not shock me if he does, and his ceiling will be capped. They've already announced that Spencer Rattler is going to get the start again at quarterback, so no Derek Carr. Not great news overall for Olave. And it's also a tough matchup against the Chargers, who are allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to receivers, so you likely have to start Olave if he's active, but temper expectations with Rattler under center. For the Chargers, I would flex Ladd McConkey. He was really disappointing on Monday night last week. He didn't really get it going until late. Had like 2 pretty bad drops as well, but the Chargers need Ladd because they don't really have anyone else in the passing game. I know Will Dissly, the tight end, had a pretty strong game for Herbert last week, but I don't think that that's going to be a regular thing. Other than that, I wouldn't be starting Bub Means. Quentin Johnson, even if he plays, I would be avoiding Johnson if possible. This is another game that could just be a ton of running, solid defense, and not much passing. So probably a low-scoring affair. Doesn't get me too excited, but Chris Olave and McConkey probably need to be in lineups, and that is about it. On to Buffalo at Seattle. Much more exciting game. 2 really good offenses going at it, and probably going to be a lot of fantasy points scored in this one. Amari Cooper, you're starting him. DK Metcalf, dealing with that knee issue. If he plays, you're playing him, but it sounds like he's probably going to miss this one if I had to guess. So that means that if Metcalf is out, you're starting Jackson Smith-Njigba, even though JSN has not been good. He had that one big game, and outside of that, he's been pretty average at best. But if no Metcalf, JSN needs to be in lineups across the board. And Amari Cooper, I mean, he ran 12 routes in his season debut last week with Buffalo and still managed 16.6 fantasy points, 4 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown on 5 targets on 12 routes. Like, if he sees 80%, even 70% of the routes this week, which he probably will, imagine what he can do with Josh Allen, especially if Seattle is putting up points against Buffalo and it's a high-scoring affair. Like, Cooper could go off in his second game with Buffalo. It would not shock me at all. Seattle is allowing 259 passing yards per game over their last 4 outings, so not a bad matchup for Amari as well. I have no problem putting Khalil Shakir in your flex. He had a nice game last week, 7 catches on 7 targets. Dude doesn't drop passes. Like, Shakir catches everything. He's the most reliable receiver on this team. And Josh Allen loves Shakir. I believe it was 7 for 76. That's a nice performance. That's a solid day, especially in PPR. So throw Shakir in your flex. And I have no problem flexing Tyler Lockett as well, only if DK is out. If Metcalf is playing, then I would probably leave Lockett on your bench. You can also sit Keon Coleman. I know he had a nice game last week, but with Amari Cooper and Khalil Shakir in this running game, I just don't think that Coleman is going to be a consistent piece in this offense. I could be wrong. Maybe he has another strong game, but I would probably bench him if you can help it. Moving on to Carolina at Denver, I don't want to start anyone in this game. Like, literally no one. Like, if you can get away from this game as much as possible, especially with Andy Dalton, who sprained his thumb in that car accident this week, he's out. So that means Bryce Young is going to be under center, which means you really cannot trust Deontay Johnson at all. Xavier Legette, can't trust him either. Like, these pass catchers take a massive hit, especially if stud corner for the Broncos, Pat Surtain, is back from that concussion. Then I really don't want to start DJ or Legette. So get away from this game if you can. Like, Cortland Sutton might have a nice day, but Sutton didn't have a target last week. Doesn't excite me either. I don't love this Broncos offense with Bo Nix. Bo Nix is not a good quarterback. Doesn't really know how to, like, set his feet and throw the football. He's very inaccurate. So start no one in this really boring, low-scoring game if you can help it. On to Kansas City at the Raiders, and there's just not a lot of wide receivers in this one either that I'm dying to start. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins is now a Kansas City Chief, but it would not be surprising if he doesn't play at all or he plays a couple snaps like Cooper did with the Bills. Not startable unless you are extremely desperate. Hopkins probably needs to be on your bench. We know Juju is out with that hamstring injury, so you probably have to start Xavier Worthy because there's just no one else outside of Travis Kelce at tight end. Xavier did see 8 targets last week, which is nice to see, but only reeled in 3 of those for 19 yards, 5.4 fantasy points. I believe he had a carry in there. He's just not really getting it done at all. He's not a consistent contributor on this offense. He's more of this splash play guy, and he hasn't been doing a lot of splashing as of late, but probably need to have Worthy in your lineup if you have him. Throw him in your flex. Jacoby Myers, if he's active, probably need to throw him in your flex as well, but I don't love it. Like, this Raiders offense is Brock Bowers, and that is about it. So Myers, not super exciting either. Justin Watson, Trey Tucker, those guys need to be on your bench. It is going to be a low-scoring affair if I had to guess in this one. A lot of running. Kareem Hunt probably scores twice again in this one. And Kansas City has a strong secondary, so I don't blame you if you don't want to start Jacoby Myers at all. Not super exciting. Not a game that I'm really looking forward to. Kansas City will win in an ugly one. On to Chicago at Washington. I hope Jaden Daniels plays in this one because you have the first overall pick in Caleb Williams and the second overall pick in Daniels going at it. We know Jaden is dealing with that rib injury right now. So hopefully he plays. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but hopefully he gives it a go because 2 pretty good offenses that are humming right now. The Bears went into a bye looking really good on offense. So you're starting DJ Moore, probably flexing Keenan Allen as well, and leave Rome Odunze on your bench. But I do like Odunze the second half of the year. If you can buy him for cheap now, get him on your roster, stash him on your bench. And DJ Moore seems like he's finally starting to build a nice rapport with Caleb Williams. He had a monster game in week 5. And yes, this Bears offense has been all over the place, pretty inconsistent, but coming out of a bye, maybe they're starting to figure it out with offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. And the Commanders, we know, you start your wide receivers against Washington, as they've given up the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And like I said, if Daniels is playing, this is probably going to be a high-scoring game. So you want as many pieces as you can in this contest. And for Washington, you're starting Terry McLaurin. And even if Daniels is out, I would still start Terry, as he looked serviceable with Marcus Mariota under center. And Terry has been playing really well this year, so you probably don't want to bench him. Yes, Chicago has been stingy against the pass, as they've allowed only 180 yards per game this season, but McLaurin is having a career year. Moving on to Dallas at San Francisco. This should be a fun game if the 49ers have any of their receivers. We know Deebo Samuel is dealing with pneumonia. Not sure if he's going to play. Juwan Jennings has that hip injury. Ricky Pearsall is going to be active. Like, if Pearsall is the only big-name wide receiver that's playing, then you're starting Pearsall, no questions asked. But if I had a crystal ball, I think Deebo at least plays. Not really sure about Jennings yet, but you're starting Deebo if he's active in this one. You're starting CeeDee Lamb for Dallas, obviously. Coming out of that bye week, hopefully Dak and Lamb can really get this thing going, because they're leaving a lot of fantasy points out on the field, and that's not good to see when you spent a top 4 pick to get Lamb on your roster. Yes, San Francisco defense has allowed just one 100-yard receiving game so far this season, and that was week 2 to who other than Justin Jefferson. So they've been a good secondary, but CeeDee Lamb is in the same tier as Jefferson. I'm guessing CeeDee puts up a big performance in this matchup. It could be high scoring if these offenses can get going, and if San Francisco has anyone on the offensive side of the ball in terms of their wide receivers. In the last game on the slate, Monday Night Football, Giants at Steelers. Malik Nabers is coming off his worst game as a pro in week 7, 4 catches, 41 yards, 8 fantasy points. He has been incredible. You can't really complain about that performance. I will say, though, I am a little bit worried about Nabers' rest of season value, because the Giants lost stud left tackle Andrew Thomas, and it just seems like Daniel Jones in this offensive line is crumbling right in front of our eyes, and that's just not giving Jones enough time for Nabers to get down the field to throw him the football. And Nabers is already kind of like, I was open, and it could unfold really poorly for this entire offense. I just don't like to put my chips on Daniel Jones as a quarterback behind a shaky offensive line that just lost their best offensive lineman. Really worries me. So if you can somehow trade Nabers for an elite wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, probably can't get Justin Jefferson, but an elite tier guy, if you can trade him off his name value, I would probably do that, because this could be a train wreck going forward for this offense, for this offensive line, for Daniel Jones, for Nabers. It could just be a trickle-down effect, and Malik Nabers could struggle because of it. So, and while we're talking about Malik Nabers in this offense struggling, how do you think that Daniel Jones is going to survive this week against the Steelers, one of the best defenses in football, one of the best pass rushes in football, led by TJ Watt? And I would not be surprised if Pittsburgh has 7+ sacks in this one. So all that to say, you're starting Malik Nabers, but I'm a little worried about him in this game and going forward. You're starting George Pickens, who looked like a different receiver with Russell Wilson as the QB1, as he had 5 catches for 111 yards, touchdown on 9 targets last week, 22.1 fantasy points. Russell Wilson with that pretty moon ball, that deep ball that he throws, is perfect for George Pickens, who's one of the best contested catch receivers in the game. So they're a match made in heaven. And that's every single game, every single matchup, every single fantasy relevant receiver. That is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, I really appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know. And I will see you in the next one.